Like, you're not a failure because you started a family and now you have this huge other priority that takes a lot of your time, a lot of your energy, a lot of your focus and mind space, interrupts you constantly, right? Like, business might look different in this season, and that's okay. It's adjusting your expectations. And again, based on what you want to accomplish. Welcome to the Business Edit Podcast, a podcast about redefining productivity for the modern woman in business and finding ways to work smarter, not harder, in business and life. I'm your host, Jade Boyd, an MBA, business minimalist, and productivity coach. I help overwhelmed business owners simplify and scale their service-based businesses by doing less but better. I help my clients create business minimalist strategies and systems that allow them to pursue ambitious goals while working at a human pace. On this podcast, we'll explore simple ways to grow your business with a life-first approach. If you're ready to scale your business, bring order to chaos, ditch the busy work, and spend more time living your life than managing your life, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Business Edit Podcast. So let me just start by saying that this podcast episode is kind of something that I needed for myself to get all of my thoughts out there and to order them and to come to my own conclusions. So much of podcasting to me is kind of like journaling, something that you have to like kind of get your thoughts out there and kind of look at them in order to figure out like what you actually think or feel about something. And that's kind of what my process has been behind the scenes, thinking about coming up with this episode and kind of collecting all of my thoughts, because honestly, this is something that I have really struggled with. I mean, since before becoming a mom, but especially since becoming a mom. And I just have so many thoughts on this topic and have kind of gone back and forth on it. And I'm just really excited to bring all of this to you and to hear your thoughts as well. So I feel like this is such a polarizing question. And on one side of the fence, you have the crowd that's saying women can absolutely do it both. Of course, women can have it all. And part of that messaging feels really empowering. Like, yes, that feels good. Like, of course, I can have it all. Like, so glad you're cheering me on. But then if I'm being honest, that gets a little bit exhausting because the big question is like, well, how? Like, how is she doing it all, right? How many times have you heard somebody online asking that question? Like, how do you balance both being a mom and running a business? And I feel like when you're bombarded with messaging that says, of course, women can do it all, but you're really struggling to find balance in your life and you're struggling to show up for even like the basic things that matter to you, that type of messaging can feel really judgmental and just like exhausting. Like maybe you don't even want to do it all in this season. So that's one side of the fence. Then there's the people on the other side of the fence who say, like, absolutely, you can't do both. If you do one, then you're not going to do great at the other. Like, you can't have both. You have to decide what you're going to give your all to. And on the one hand, that can feel like a relief of like, oh man, there's nothing wrong with me. It's okay that I'm struggling to do both because that's actually something that's impossible. So it makes sense that I'm feeling this way. But then also defeating because it's like, is this really it? Is this my life and I can only do one thing and I can't aspire to anything more than this? Is this just like my lot in life that I'm not going to feel fulfilled? And as humans, I just don't think that that is all that we're made for or all that's there for us either. And so, like I said, I've really struggled because I don't see myself falling onto either side of the fence. I can see truth and also see subtle lies and maybe even a little bit of like idolatry and idolizing things that were never meant to fulfill you on both sides of the fence. And so, in this episode, I do want to share kind of where I've landed with this. And it's not something that I've decided once and for all, this is my stance. This is just like as I've been processing things, where I have sort of found peace in this conversation and in my answer to this question for my own life. And also stay to the end because there is also like so much hope to share if you are somebody who's trying to do both. And I definitely don't want this to be one of those depressing episodes that leaves you feeling discouraged or, like I said, either exhausted because you feel like I'm pushing you to do everything because everyone seems to be doing better than you, or just depressed because it's like, really, this is it. I can't have more than this. So I don't want you to stay in either of those places. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to walk away with some encouragement. Okay, so let me just come out and say my opinion on this. And then I'm going to get into the details of like kind of how I came to this conclusion, but I'm not going to leave you hanging on what I think. So if I were to summarize my answer to the question, is it possible for women to have it all? If I were to summarize my answer in one sentence, I would say no. And that is a hot take. And I realize that not everyone agrees with that, but here's why. I do not think women can have it all because I don't think anybody can have it all. It's not a gender thing, it's a human thing. We are all limited as human beings. Some more limited than others, and sometimes gender plays a role in that. You can't say something across the board for everybody in a specific gender. But as humans, we are limited in so many ways, more than we can even recognize. And even if we recognize them, maybe you don't want to admit it to yourself. But I see women, especially, believing that there's something wrong with them or that there's this secret solution that they haven't found yet. There's this hack, there's this tip, there's this, like, secret society with all of the answers, and they just haven't found it yet, but if they did, then they would have it all together, they would have the capacity to do everything that they feel they should be doing, everything that they want to do, and I just don't think that that's the case because life inherently comes with trade-offs. I talk about trade-offs all the time on the podcast, but with any limited resource like time, energy, focus, financial resources, anything that you spend on one thing by nature cannot be spent on a different thing. So it comes with trade-offs, right? So any minute you're spending on your business is a minute that you're not spending working out or being truly present with your kids or connecting with your spouse or cleaning your house and vice versa. You could say that for any of those topics, right? And in response to that, many of us try to multitask. Well, I can do both at the same time. I can listen to a podcast while I'm playing with my kids, or I can connect with my spouse while doing laundry. And some of those things work well. And sometimes when you try to multitask, it doesn't work well. Like multitasking by definition is not actually a thing. You can't do two things at the same time. It's just really rapid task switching. And we've had an episode about multitasking and the science behind it. But multitasking only really works well if you're doing one thing that's mindless. And so there are a few cases where that is helpful and you can get away with, making the most out of your time. But those hacks really only go so far. And truly, we do have limited resources and there's trade offs in general. If you spend your time, money, energy, financial resources on one thing, you're not spending them on something else. In addition to that, I don't think anybody can have it all because in order to really feel like we have it all, we would have to completely cross out our to do list and accomplish everything that we could ever hope to accomplish, experience everything that we ever want to experience, show up perfectly in every area of our life and not only like accomplish it, but really feel fulfilled and rewarded and accomplished by it, which is often not the case when you get to the achievement that you think you want. And none of us is going to do that in our lifetime, right? Like you don't know how many years you have on this earth and there's no way that you can travel to every single country and meet every single person and have every single experience. And I mean, even if we bring it down to like crossing off your business bucket list to work with every coach you want to work with, to create every offer that you want to create every podcast episode that you want to create, to get all the Instagram followers and like sponsors that you hope to get. Like we want so much. And like I said, we as humans and women are like built to dream. And that is a good thing to have things that you want in life, to want to make an impact, to want to experience good things. Like that's a good desire. But we only get to experience a fraction of the things that we dream of because we are limited. It's not to say that you won't have a completely fulfilling life and that you'll accomplish a lot, but everybody at the end of the day is limited in some capacity. So, is it possible for women to have it all? No, I don't think so, but you can still have a lot. So, that's kind of what I want to talk about for the rest of this episode, like kind of what this looks like and how I kind of came to this conclusion. So, at the end of the day, if you can't have it all, this is something that I've been processing through myself too. Like what does it even mean to have it all? Because in general, okay, I'm not going to accomplish everything that I could hope to accomplish in every area of my life. Got it. So then what would it look like for me to have it all? Like personally, how am I defining that for myself? And I think the problem with this question is that when we are pursuing the idea of like, I want to have it all, we're setting our standards based on X, Y, and Z influencer or someone else, some other mom in your community or one of your friends who seems to have it all together or seems to have it all. And we're putting that as like our benchmark. But then we don't realize that once we get to that benchmark, like that person has a higher benchmark, right? that is the hedonic treadmill, which I've talked about before. Science shows that we acclimate to certain levels of success as soon as we get there, like very quickly, that becomes the new normal. And then it's the hedonic treadmill. You just like keep moving and moving and moving, but you're not getting any happier or feeling any more accomplished. You're just like constantly in motion, moving forward. But as soon as you get forward, there's like always that next step that you want to take. I also think that every person has a different capacity in general, and every person has a different capacity in different seasons of life. And I kind of visualize this like a suitcase, and everyone carries a different size suitcase with different storage capacities. And sometimes in certain seasons, their suitcase is stuffed full, and sometimes it's a little bit empty and they have room for extra things to stuff in their suitcase. In general, I feel like my suitcase is pretty small, which is why I'm so organized because I do think I just have a low capacity for chaos in my life. And I am generally, I would say, lower energy than most people. I can be pretty lazy about some things, which is why I like efficiency and automation so much. But I think, especially in this season of my life with a first baby where the learning curve is so high, my suitcase feels particularly full in one area, and my capacity in general, even though it's lower than I would say average, it's even particularly low in this season of my life. So having a doll to me in this season looks very, very different than it will in other seasons and looks different for my life than it will for your life. So I think a more important question to ask yourself as you're processing through this, maybe not necessarily asking yourself, is it possible for me to have it all? But redefining what does it look like for me to have it all based on the season of life that I'm in right now? What does that even look like on paper? Like, what does that look like day to day for you? And then really mapping it out. Like, is your version of what it looks like to have it all realistic for this season? And if it is, like, let's figure out how to make it possible. And for many of you, there's a lot of room to grow in that department and like systemizing or making time for these things that you really want to make time for that just kind of get put on the back burner week after week, season after season. And for some of you, you might realize that this notion of having it all is actually an unachievable goal or like this vague moving target that you're never actually going to reach. And so it might be more helpful to ask yourself, what does it really mean for me to feel like I have it all in this season? Okay. And when you get clarity on what it looks like for you to have it all, the next step is to really systemize that. And I do believe that it's possible for every woman to live a really fulfilling life and be responsible in all areas of her life, be a good steward of relationships, of health, marriage, kids, finances, business, client work. Like, I do think that there's so much capacity to balance these things when you have realistic expectations for what that's going to look like and what your suitcase looks like in this season. But I also think that it takes time and it's going to take a lot of trade offs and hard decisions to get to the place where those things feel sustainable and you feel like you are showing up as the best version of yourself in those different areas of your life in a way that is not running you into the ground. And truly, that really comes down to systems and automating the right actions, getting the right like rhythms in place in your life. So you're not having to try so hard every time it comes to like planning your month or planning your week or even planning your day, that you're not struggling to actually feel like you're getting things done. Systems just play a huge role in that, and systems don't happen overnight. It's something that you really have to take time and energy and experiment, and it's going to change in every season. So you're always going to be like perfecting and tweaking and adjusting your systems too. But I do think that is the best way to free up time and space on the things that don't really matter so that you do have more capacity to feel like you have it all in these areas of your life that might be getting neglected, or you're feeling like you're not having time to fit in, wondering like, how does everybody else quote unquote do it all, right? Like, systems play just a huge role in that, as well as setting realistic benchmarks based on your own life and not somebody else's. Okay. And then the third part of this is knowing how to plan, which seems like such a basic skill. It's kind of one of those things when you're an adult that everybody just assumes that you know how to do because it's a basic life skill. But like any other basic life skill that's not taught in school, like they don't teach us how to plan in school, and certainly not how to plan as an adult with kids and a marriage and a mortgage and housework and a whole business that you might be running completely by yourself. Like, that is just not a skill that most people are taught at any point in their life. But it's one of those things where, like, okay, nobody taught me that, but I should just know how to do that, right? There's like a lot of shame around it. But I do think when it comes to feeling like, oh man, like I know I should be making time for date night, or I really want to make time for more date nights. Like, if I was really actually having it all in my marriage, that is something that I would be doing, but I just don't feel like there's ever the time, or I don't even know how that would work. I think a lot of struggles like that in any specific area of your life or business really comes down to planning and being in those consistent rhythms of planning on like a quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily basis. Again, after the systems part, because if you just rely on your plans to like have that to-do list generated out of thin air on all of those time horizons, it's going to feel impossible. It probably is just going to be impossible. And that's why systems come first, because once systems are in place, so much of that to do list is just eliminated. And then you can actually spend time planning the things that do really matter. So, just to recap those three things that I talked about, clarifying what does it mean for you to have it all in this season, systemizing your life so that you are able to free up more capacity in your suitcase for the things that matter to you. And then, third, putting planning routines in place so that you are consistently putting those things on your calendar that maybe aren't making the cut that you know are super, super important and would help you feel like you were showing up as the best version of yourself in these different areas of your life. A few episodes back, I had a two-part series having 9 women who kept their kids at home full time while building their business, kind of share about how they did it, if they had any regrets, what they would do differently, kind of just recapping what that process looked like for them. And I promised in that episode that I would have my own takeaways at the end of the episode, and I did not. But here are my takeaways from listening to all of those women's stories and kind of summing up like, okay, what are the trends? What are the things that almost every woman said? And what can I take away from this and apply to my own business? And I feel like it is so in line with this topic of is it possible for women to have it all? And so here's what I gleaned from those episodes, and I'll link them in the show notes if you haven't listened to those 9 women's stories. It's so good. So, first of all, going back to what I said about having limited resources and limited time, and time you spend on one thing is not time you spent on another thing. Like, that's kind of like the depressing side of the coin. But the really encouraging side of the coin that I got from listening to those people's stories, and something that I have since like definitely experienced in my own life, is that time feels fluid. And most of those women said that after having kids, their business was more successful and they were more productive as a person, even though they had this tiny human taking, 100 plus hours of their week that they used to have to spend on anything they wanted to before. Now that they had less time for their business, they were actually more successful because it forced them to get really, really clear on what they were saying yes and no to. And it forced them to not procrastinate. And, if you have 1 hour for a nap to get something done, you just get it done. And you're not a perfectionist about it, and you don't like sit around for 20 minutes on email because you only have that hour, right? And so, yes, you have a lot less time, and time is a limited resource, but also it's fluid. And when you are forced to balance many things, it does make you more efficient and more productive in many areas of your life. So that is like the good side of the coin, and something that's a positive takeaway, something that you should be encouraged by from those stories and from this episode. Another thing that I heard consistently from those women is that they felt like they couldn't do what they did previously as a business owner, that they had that smaller capacity, that smaller suitcase, and they adjusted their goals because of that to make room for this huge other area of their life that was also really important. And again, that comes down to deciding what having it all means for you. And having it all might mean like, hey, now I get to invest all of this time in my kids and in my family and in my home, and I still get to keep this thing that I'm really, really passionate about, even though, like, I'm not gonna make as much as I did before, maybe, and I'm not gonna serve as many people as I could before, maybe. But also, it's gonna be really fun and rewarding and fulfilling and worth my time. And it's gonna be smaller in this season. And next season, maybe I go harder on that. But also, it just looks different and kind of adjusting based on the season that you're in. And so I hope that you were also encouraged by hearing their stories, and that it's okay to adjust your goals. Like, you're not a failure because you started a family and now you have this huge other priority that takes a lot of your time, a lot of your energy, a lot of your focus and mind space, interrupts you constantly, right? Like, business might look different in this season, and that's okay. It's adjusting your expectations. And again, based on what you want to accomplish. Another thing that almost all of those women said is that they really wanted to separate mom life and business, and that they did not like having to do both at the same time. So that looked like asking for help or getting part-time childcare in home, or going to the gym and utilizing that childcare so that they had time to work so that they could truly focus on one thing at a time, which makes so much sense to me. Again, coming back to the multitasking thing, it's virtually impossible to do two things at once. And when you are able to focus on one thing, you not only feel better about it, but you're more efficient at it. And so it completely makes sense to me. And it's something I felt in my own life too. They also mentioned, and this is not something that I've gotten to yet, but they mentioned that it got easier when kids got older and went to school. So again, it's just a season and you having it all looks different in certain seasons than it does in others. Okay, and here's one of the most important takeaways that I had from listening to their stories is that none of them had any regrets for the time that they were able to spend with their kids in that specific, like special, limited season of their life. And so, yes, there's trade offs. Yes, we have to make some hard decisions. Yes, it's virtually impossible. It's just impossible to give all of your energy, 100% of your energy, 100% of your time to multiple things. By nature, you do have to split it up on certain things. And when one thing's taking more of your energy, other things don't get that energy or that time or that focus or, the results, right? But also, they didn't have any regrets for making those decisions in that time because it was just a special season. And so bringing this back to the bigger picture of like, okay, is it possible for women to have it all? I feel like women like me who are in the midst of like baby stage struggle a lot. At least what I've noticed in my like peer group and online is that moms especially struggle with the question of is it possible for women to have it all? Because there's a certain season where it's just really demanding and really difficult. But then you look back at the question. I love asking the question of like, what's going to matter when you're 80? Kind of looking at that big picture view. And like, will you feel like you had it all when you're 80 if you step back from business or you shift more of your focus and energy and financial resources and time to your family or your business for a certain season? Like, overall, looking back, are you going to feel like you were able to have it all? And I think we get so hyper focused on the season that we're in that we kind of forget to take that bigger picture view. And when I do look at it from that perspective, then the answer kind of shifts to like, yes, of course, it's possible to look back and feel like you really did it all because doing it all doesn't happen one day. Like I don't feel on any given day that I'm doing it all. But when you look back on that bigger picture perspective, it becomes a lot easier to see like over the course of my lifetime, what is it going to look like for me to feel like I showed up for my business and my family and my health the way that I wanted to? No day individually is probably going to look like a complete success, but look at the trends over time and think about like, am I going to regret the decisions that I'm making now or not? And that was another thing that I heard reiterated by them is that they constantly feel like they're not doing enough in either category because, of course, anytime you spend with your family is time you're not spending on your business. And anytime you spend on your business is time you're not spending with your family. So either way, you're thinking about one or the other and feeling like, hey, there's more that I could be doing in both category. And that's totally true. But it doesn't mean that you're not doing enough. It just means that you could do more. And you can always do more. No matter how much capacity you have, you can always do more, right? But one thing they also mentioned was that having established processes and systems was a complete game changer. And I feel like I already kind of reiterated that on taking the burden off and eliminating some of those non essential things that are bogging up your time and energy and your calendar and your pocketbook. And there's so much room for improvement when it comes to processes and systems. And I do feel like being forced to balance both does force you to get more efficient if you are somebody who wants to do both. Okay, we're getting long winded, but I have two last things. So, first, I had this email from a podcast listener and I wanted to share it because I think it drives home the struggle really, really hard. And then I want to compare her situation to my situation and kind of give you this big picture because you might be in this place right now. And so I just want you to know that you're not alone and hope that this feels encouraging to you. So I'm going to cut down what she said a little bit, but she was talking about how she's in this marketing group for people in her field, which covers a lot in planning and goal setting. She's naturally pretty good at planning and organizing, so she doesn't really need help with that. She says, I'm really not quite sure what I actually need help with. I do very much want to have a minimalist business because realistically, I only have about 10 hours a week to spend on it. I think I need coping skills to figure out how to function in spite of overwhelm because, as a highly sensitive person with 6 children, 2 of whom are homeschooled, a non supportive husband, health problems, insomnia, and a lot of balls to juggle, there is literally no way, short of moving to a small secluded island alone, to minimize my life enough for me not to feel constantly overwhelmed, which is probably not particularly useful as feedback. But anyway, so I did ask her permission to share this because I feel like, man, it just like gets me. The struggle is real. Like this is really hard to do both and not feel completely overwhelmed all of the time, right? But I also want to compare my situation, which is completely different. And I feel similarly. So again, comparing your situation to somebody else's situation and feeling like, but I'm not going to feel this way, or I'm going to feel better when I achieve X, or I have X amount of time, or I'm in a different season, right? But like I said, have an extremely low capacity. I feel overwhelmed consistently. If I didn't have systems in my life, I don't think that I would be able to function. And so part of why I have gotten so good at what I do is because I have needed it out of necessity to actually function. So in my situation, my husband is incredibly supportive in all areas of life, in home and parenthood, in business. He had 16 weeks of paid paternity leave. He gets unlimited time off. He generally just has a ton of flexibility for when and where he works. He does all the dishes in our house. So, like, bragging on Caleb, he truly is the best. I have a ton of support from him, and he's 100% willing to help with anything that I ask him to do. And he does so many things without me having to ask him to. We live in a community where I also have a lot of support from my friends and my family. We are healthy, generally speaking. We don't struggle with any health problems. I mean, definitely not any chronic health problems. We only have one child, not six, and we can afford to hire in-home childcare. And I mean, we have the option to send her to part-time daycare if we wanted to. I don't feel quite ready for that yet, but we could. That's an option that's on the table. And like with all of those things being so much easier for me, I still struggle with feeling overwhelmed on a weekly basis because there are desires within me to do 1,000 times more than I know I'm capable of doing this week in both motherhood and in business. And that's where I think we really do have to separate that internal overwhelm from external overwhelm, because there are real sources of overwhelm that are coming from your external environment, from the people around you, from your situation. But then there's internal overwhelm and how we do cope with the external influences on us. And so there are some people who cope with overwhelm really, really well, who can be put in those situations where it's the direst of circumstances and everything is absolutely horrible and they're just super chill. I would say Caleb is one of those people. I am not one of those people. I can be put in completely zen circumstances, and actually it sometimes makes me more overwhelmed when my circumstances are a little bit too chill. I shared a few episodes ago about our experience going to Punta Cana, and it's just a country whose culture is very different, and everybody at the airport is really chill, like, no need to give directions, just, like, everyone will figure it out. It's super slow, laid back, and it makes me more stressed, right? And so there is dealing with one or the other, and so kind of coming back to this point, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but coming back to the point, is it possible to have it all? Even when you do check those boxes and it's like, "Oh, yeah, this is working, accomplished that, this is running smoothly," eliminated that source of overwhelm. There's still a lot of internal work to do to actually feel like you have it all, even when you check the boxes. And you can do that work before you check the boxes too, when it comes to that internal processing and how you deal with your life circumstances and how you feel about your life. That can change before your circumstances change. And that is one thing that is always under your control to work on and to influence and change. And I know that external overwhelm and those circumstances are real and they cause real heartache and real problems and a lot of challenges. But also, there's two parts to that coin. And I just wanted to make sure to separate that in case you've never looked at it as that like two part problem. Okay, one closing note, and then we're going to wrap up this episode. So, one closing note, especially for women of faith, women who would call themselves Christians. This is something that I read in a book that I was reading recently that really resonated with me and I felt like was so in line with this topic. The author was talking about this idea of consummation, which by definition means to finish something or make it perfect. And ultimately, I think we as women have that desire for consummation in many areas of our life. Like we just want it to feel finished and complete and perfect. At least I know I have that desire. And that desire is consistently just pointing us towards heaven and the way that things are meant to be and the way that things will eventually be. But here on earth, we're living in that imperfect reality that like things are not going to be made complete. Things are not going to be finished yet. And ultimately, that is good news. Like, we do not have to do everything in this life. We don't have to finish anything. We don't have to accomplish everything that's on our to-do list. And none of us will anyway. Like, God has numbered our days, and we have an eternity of joy to look forward to. So, if you are feeling a lot of pressure and a lot of deadlines, where like, hey, the years are ticking by, the seasons are ticking by, and I don't feel like I'm making any progress, like, just know that it's a good thing to have that desire to complete things and for things to come to completion and to be made perfect. Like, that's a good desire, but ultimately, we're not made to have control over that or accomplish all of that within our lifetime. There's a few things that we do get to do and find joy in, and that is like good in itself. So I just wanted to leave you with that word of encouragement. In closing, I would love for you to think about, like, what does it actually look like for you to have it all in this season? And if you have thoughts on this episode, or if you disagree with me even, I would love to hear from you. This is something that I, like I said, have been thinking a lot about, and I'm sure that I have a lot to learn from you all and your viewpoints as well. So if you have thoughts, feel free to email me at jade@jadeboyd.co. It's me answering my email. And so I would love to hear from you. You can also submit questions. If you have a struggle or a question that you are dealing with as a business owner when it comes to being productive and organized, I would love to hear from you. I'm planning to do a Q&A episode in the next couple months, compiling some questions from listeners and answering them in an episode. So if you have something that you've been like chewing on or struggling with, or just a particular obstacle that keeps coming up again and again and again, I'm going to link that form in the show notes, and I would love to hear your questions. So I hope you enjoyed tuning into this episode. It's a little bit different than what I would typically do on the podcast, but I hope you enjoyed it. And again, ultimately, I hope that you're leaving with a little bit of encouragement if you've been struggling with feeling like you're not doing it all. So thanks so much again for tuning in today, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Edit podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd be so grateful if you take a screenshot and share it on Instagram, tagging me at jadeboyd.co. I'm on a mission to empower a new generation of women to become the types of wives, moms, and business owners that they've always wanted to be. Because empowered women change their families and communities for the better, and this is how we'll change the world. Sharing your takeaways from this episode on Instagram will help more women in business discover helpful episodes and level up in life and business each week. Don't forget to check out the show notes for the tools and resources mentioned in today's episode, because good ideas don't grow businesses. Action does. I'll see you next time on the Business Edit podcast.